Let's let everybody get into the session.
Sorry, y'all, I'm getting over a cold. So if you hear coughing and a lot of water drinking, maybe some cough drops, I apologize.
No worries. I'm kind of fighting one myself right now.
It's that time of year.
Yes. All right. Well, it is exactly 6 o'clock and we will get started for the night. I am Michelle Mangum. I am the Abolish Committee co-chair for the Junior League of New Orleans. And right now, the Junior League of New Orleans is an organization of women committed to promoting volunteerism, developing the potential of women, and improving communities through the effective action and leadership of trained volunteers. The Abolish movement was founded in 2014 by the Junior League of Tampa to unite Tampa organizations and agencies in drawing attention to the problem of child sex slavery in the Tampa Bay area. In 2017, the Association of Junior Leagues International adopted Abolish as an association-wide initiative to scale the movement and unite communities across the United States and beyond, in an effort to generate greater awareness for the intractable systematic issue of child sex slavery. The Junior League of New Orleans is committed to raising awareness, providing support, and putting an end to this heinous crime. I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight as we discuss the film, Stopping Traffic. And tonight would not have been possible without the generous support of Women United. This is a group of 70,000 women worldwide who have invested $3 million into the local community. They focus their efforts of eradicating poverty through policy, philanthropy, and programming. I think we might have a Dr. Toya Barnes-Teamer with us. Is she on with us? I don't think so. Oh, there you are. Hey, Dr. Toya.
Hey, y'all. I am in the middle between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. So I stopped so I could take the call.
Wonderful, wonderful. I am actually to the part of Women United. So here with us is Dr. Toya Barnes-Teamer. Dr. Barnes-Teamer is the chairwoman of Women United. She's been engaged with United Way of Southeast Louisiana since 1988. Dr. Toya is committed to serving her beloved city and the state. She is passionate about the mission of the United Way and its commitment to eradicating poverty for women and children through equality in education, healthcare, and economic prosperity. She's going to tell us a little bit more about Women United.
Thank you, Michelle. And good evening, everybody. And I apologize if you hear any noise in the background. I really am passionate about this topic and about the work that we're doing. So I literally stopped in between Baton Rouge and New Orleans at a Starbucks so that I could jump on with you all. So yes, we are very proud to sponsor Junior League's Abolish webinar for a second year. For those who are not familiar with Women United is a powerful global network within United Way of 70,000 plus women leaders across more than 165 communities in 6 countries, all focused on building stronger communities. Like United Way, Women United fights for the health, education, and financial stability of every person in every community. Advocacy and philanthropy are the heart of Women United. The group pools the time, talent, and financial resources of its members to bring to the forefront a positive impact which women can have on a community. Members' dues and donations fund community grants that the general membership that ultimately service the most vulnerable women and children in our community. Since 2002, Women United has invested and led the allocation of $3 million here at home to fix local problems, and our volunteers give their time and talent to address our community's most critical issue, which is poverty. Women United is a network like no other, doing more, raising more, and going deeper and broader to make a lasting difference in people's lives. So if anyone is interested in joining our powerful group of women, similar to our women that are on this panel, feel free to reach out to us through Michelle Dunnick at the United Way. And I'm just excited that we're here in support of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Toya Barnes-Teamer, for being with us tonight and obviously supporting the Abolish Committee and the Junior League of New Orleans. Tonight, we have 4 incredible women joining us to talk about human trafficking in the film Stopping Traffic. Before I introduce tonight's speakers, we will have a Q&A that we would prefer everybody to go into the chat box and look and type in any of your questions that you have for the evening. And this will be recorded and shared with all of our attendees. So I will now introduce these incredible women. First off, we have Sadhvi Shree, Director of Stopping Traffic. Sadhvi is the first North American Jain female monk, a U.S.-Iraq war veteran, an international and TEDx speaker, author, activist, and award-winning filmmaker. Her first documentary is Stopping Traffic, the movement to end sex trafficking. And her second documentary is Surviving Sex Trafficking, which will be released in March 2022. Driven by her deep-seated devotion to humanity, she uses her talents and skills to raise awareness about violence in the world and ways to change it. Sadhvi has a bachelor's degree in communications from California State University, Long Beach, and a background in web development, marketing, video production, and book publishing. Second, we have Sadhvi Anubhuti is a Jain monk, speaker, activist, and a human animal rights advocate. She is the assistant director and co-producer of the film Stopping Traffic, the movement to end sex trafficking. Since learning about trafficking, Anubhuti just dedicates her efforts to work in practical ways to eradicate mental, emotional, and most importantly, physical slavery in her lifetime. Next, we have Carr, founder and executive director of Eden House. Carr is an attorney and former United States diplomat responsible for writing the Trafficking in Persons Report for the country of Jamaica. Recognizing the prevalence of human trafficking both internationally and in the United States, Carr worked with the Representative Neil Aberson to draft legislation for Louisiana that would better protect children who were trafficked into the sex trade. In addition to fighting this modern day slavery through legislation, Carr and the board of directors of Eden House understand that our society must offer those who have been victimized solutions for healing. She travels extensively speaking on the issues of human trafficking and recovering, as well as assisting organizations that hope to establish similar residencies throughout the country. Carr received her BA from UC Berkeley, her JD from Tulane Law, and LLM from Georgetown Law School and International Law. And then next we have Susan Dold. Nice to see you again this year, Susan. Susan is the Systems Administrator for Truckers Against Trafficking. In this role, she's the bookkeeper, the HR manager, helps to manage the Freedom Drivers Project, and equips companies to educate their staff to combat human trafficking. She's been involved in the anti-trafficking realm for over 10 years. Susan co-founded a local nonprofit in Denver, helped start a recovery house, and is passionate about educating people on the realities of domestic sex trafficking. Ladies, thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Susan now to get us started.
Great. Thanks so much. It's great to be back again. I was on here last year and I feel very inadequate to host this, but very flattered that I am here. You all are amazing. My co-hosts here, panelists. And so let's dig in. I feel like we could be here for hours with everything to talk about. So let's just get started real quick, and then we'll do some Q&A and have some Q&A for everyone at the end. Gosh, for those that have watched the film, so incredible. Sadhvi, could you just tell us why it was important for you to make the film? What sort of led to that?
Thank you, Susan. And again, thank you to the Junior League of New Orleans and Women United. And it's an honor to be on this panel and be with you all tonight. Stopping Traffic was inspired by both of ours experience of pain, and just, it's so hard to imagine girls, women, boys, men being raped for profit. To really experience that in your mind, it just, and into your emotions, it just takes you into a different place. And when you're touched by something, you're moved to do something about it. And even though we didn't have any background in filmmaking, we wanted to educate our spiritual community, our local community. So we turned to Google to figure out how to make a film, because we wanted to educate other people this way. It was our hope that we can prevent this from continuing to happen and help those who are enslaved today.
Yeah, and wow, what a film. Congratulations. I mean, I just was in tears. You know, you mentioned that one of the main goals was to learn about sex trafficking. So what were some of your takeaways? And did things change from beginning to end?
When we went into the film, we had a little idea of what sex trafficking was. We knew that people were being raped for profit. There were pimps, there were traffickers, but we didn't really understand what was going on behind the scenes. And one of the misconceptions I went in was realizing that, you know, I thought it was just mostly in third world countries. I didn't realize how much it was happening here in the United States. And through this journey, you know, we realized that, hey, in different countries, it happens for different reasons. Maybe parents have to sell their children, unfortunately, to get themselves food, to provide shelter. And here in the United States, it might be for a different reason. So it was coming to the realization that there's no one solution for the entire world, because every country is different, every culture is different. The why it's happening is totally different. And so that's why with the film, going to different countries, we realized, like, well, what is the answer? And so the only thing we can think of is, well, we have to generate a movement. We have to educate globally. So this way people are inspired to come together to help end it.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, great.
Most people do believe that it is somewhere over there, right? And not here in our backyard. And so I love that you weaved different countries in there, including, of course, the United States, which is where Triggers Against Trafficking mostly. But let's maybe step back and what is the definition of human trafficking? Kara, can you start with your definition of human trafficking, and then Sadhvi, maybe you can pipe in as well.
Yes, hi. Well, thank you to the Junior League of New Orleans for having me, and congratulations to Sadhvi and Sadhvi, the filmmakers. What a beautiful film, and what a beautiful way that you have brought attention to this issue. It's hard to do, and it's hard to talk about, and you did an amazing job. So thank you for that. So I, as an attorney, kind of take the a legal view towards what is human trafficking. And so in Louisiana, we drafted legislation to mimic the federal legislation. So, and, you know, the definition of human trafficking is going to be different depending on where you are legally. So the federal definition and the Louisiana definition is very similar. If somebody is under the age of 18 and engaged in prostitution, they should be legally considered a victim of human trafficking. If they're 18 or over and are involved in the sex trade due to force, fraud, or coercion, they are part of the sex trade and they are human trafficking victims. So force is easy. Somebody holds you at gunpoint, somebody beats you if you don't do your job. Fraud and coercion can be commingled, but internationally, we see things like you're told, come. For example, when I was a diplomat living in Jamaica, they brought in women from the Dominican Republic. They were told, come to Jamaica. We have a great job for you. You're going to be a waitress. You're going to be a go-go dancer. You'll come and you'll have this job. These women moved to Jamaica, usually because they needed to support their families. And they usually didn't have a lot of money. They got to Jamaica. In the Dominican Republic, most people speak Spanish. In Jamaica, people speak English. So they came to a new country. They didn't speak the language. They didn't have money. They didn't have a phone. They were there illegally because the pimps would actually pay off the Jamaican officers, visa officers, to illegally issue visas for them to come into the country. And then once they got there and figured out they were there for prostitution, they were then now there illegally, right? They didn't have a visa for prostitution. That visa doesn't exist. So now if they actually could escape the brothel that was padlocked from the outside, they would get police and they are the criminal. They're put in jail. And if eventually they are extradited back to the Dominican Republic, their family often doesn't want them back because they're shamed. You're a prostitute. You made this choice. You went to do this. And now we don't even want you as a member of our family. And so while the definition is different in different countries, it's also one of those things that once you start to see the story or a similar story over and over again, you get a gut feeling for it. Is this person there by choice? Or are they manipulated and brainwashed or forced into a situation, or their passports being held and they have no money? And you can kind of get a gut feeling for what that ends up looking like all over the world.
Yeah, great points. You know, when we talk about coercion, you know, it's oftentimes threatening people's families, threatening their lives, you know, threatening to go public with a video that they've taken. You know, that's what happens here in the United States a lot. Yeah, it's just heartbreaking when we think about these things, and so many things to unpack in that, Kara.
Right? There's a lot to it. There's a lot of ways you can get somebody to do something that they don't want to do. Right. And like having done this for 10 years now, Eden House has been open for 10 years. And even before that, helping to change the laws, I've heard a lot of different stories where, you know, do you think you're going from high school with the cute guy, right? And you know, oh, you're driving me home. Oh, we'll just stop by my house. And they give you a code and it's drugged. And all of a sudden you're in all these pictures that you don't even know what you're doing. And if you don't do what I say, to the priest, I'll give him to your parents, I'll give him to your father's job, and he's going to lose your job, which of course makes no sense. But when you're young and you're vulnerable, you don't realize that doesn't make sense from an adult perspective. It makes sense from a 13, 14, 15 perspective.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
There's a lot of ways to get people to do things they don't want to do.
Yeah. Again, so much to unpack there. Let's just kind of stay focused here. Sadhvi, if you had a definition of human trafficking, what would you say that was?
You know,
what Kara just covered, and thank you again, ladies, for all your efforts to combat human trafficking. We're very honored to be here. What Kara just said is exactly what human trafficking is, but for us, in simple terms, we like to say that it is the enslavement and exploitation of vulnerable souls through work, sex, organs for profits. So it's just kind of like a quick, short, definition to kind of understand what it is, because it can get kind of complicated and messy when you go deeper into the full definition. But yes.
Yeah, so many things involved in that for sure. I like that precise definition or concise definition for sure. But there's always nuances for sure. So Carrie, you brought up a good point, right? People don't talk about this. So why are people not talking? Why is this not dinner table conversation? Why is this not conversation you're having at a party? I know it's definitely not party conversation, right? When I bring
People
it up
have from me at parties, Susan.
I know. So, but we need to bring it up with our kids. We need to bring it up with our, all of our kids, our teenagers, our teenagers' friends, our friends. It just needs to be normal conversation. Why is it that people aren't talking about this? Do you have thoughts on that, Kara?
I think that there are a lot of reasons. I think it includes the uncomfortableness, with talking about abuse. I think it includes, people don't want to talk about child sexual abuse. That's often a precursor to human trafficking. People don't want to talk about also maybe the underserved, right? And it's very easy to sweep people under a rug. You don't want, it's difficult to talk about homelessness, but then add layers of homelessness. I mean, most of the women who come to Eden House are homeless by the time they get to Eden House. But let's talk about, when they were sexually abused by whatever family member or a neighbor as a small child, right? And they've slipped through the cracks of our school system, of our systems to protect children. I mean, often children try to help, but it's very hard to get somebody to listen, and they don't know the way to approach necessarily getting people to listen with their message. And I think that at Eden House, we believe that human trafficking and what happens to our youth, our women, our boys is really a failure of all society, that we've let people fall through the cracks like this. And so to talk about it and really think about it makes you have to think about your place in the failure, and what you tolerating that's not tolerable. What are you accepting just because you were born into it and you haven't really looked, or it seemed normal? And then when you have to start looking at your place of blame, right? We're all a part of this society. We're all living in this world. We're all a part of what's going on Bourbon Street, and accepting it, accepting things that shouldn't be accepted. And I think that's really hard for people to do.
Agreed. Absolutely. Sadhvi, a big contributor to the powerful impact of the film is the cast, who exhibits vulnerability, right? Kara, like you were talking about, people don't want to talk about it, but man, the people in the film were talking about it, and it was so powerful. Tell us just a little bit about the process of asking those participants and their journey through the filming.
It was a very interesting process, because we didn't know how to approach nonprofits or survivors, because it's such a sensitive topic. But we quickly realized, hey, we're monks. They know that they can trust us, that we're not going to judge them. And so by building that trust, truly listening, showing that we truly care, we're not there to exploit them or their story, and we genuinely want to learn about their experiences, so this way we can educate others. That really helped open them up to share what they have gone through or what they've seen. When we went to Mexico, Sadhvi was leading the interviews in Mexico, and they fully opened up to her, you saw Mario, the ex-trafficker in the film, and we didn't really know we were going to have a chance to interview him. And Sadhvi Anubhuti, just gently guided that process. I mean, this is an ex-trafficker, right? And then, I mean, you can speak to this, but people also have their stories. Pain is universal. So do we justify it? No, but as filmmakers and as people, it's so important for us to also understand the story.
Yeah, to find the right people. We interviewed 70 people to get to the, I think, 15 people that we featured in the film. And it was all about finding the right people, the right voices, and the stories to really have the impact that the film had. And quite honestly, we did not expect the big result that we got for making this film, and the big impact that it had, the awards that we won. And I think it is because of those people that we selected to be featured on the film. And yes, meeting an ex-trafficker was quite impactful, not only for the film, but even for us to understand the problem at a deeper level. Why do these people do what they do? And understanding that in many cases, it's not what we think. We think it's like just evil, bad people going after, vulnerable people. And in some cases it is, but in the case of Mario, in this case or instance, he was abused daily since the age of 8, and his world was prostitution or human trafficking. That's how he was raised. A lot of physical abuse as well as sexual abuse. And so understanding those things, where even the traffickers have problems, they have where they come from and why they do the things they do, helps us understand this problem deeper.
Yeah, that was a great storyline there, because oftentimes I know I get focused on the victim. How do we help them? Where do they come from? How do we, help and educate people to not become a victim? But we also need to think of the trafficker, right? Like Mario, how did that happen? How do we stop that from happening? How do we tell our boys and our men that it's not okay to do that, and that it's okay to reach out for help? Anyway, I just love that. Carr, maybe you can talk a little bit about how Eden House helps the victims that come in, the survivors, to kind of go through the process and come out on the other side.
Well, and it's a process, and
we know it's not short.
It is not short. It is not short. When people first come to us, they tend to be very tired, and sometimes straight off the street. There's a lot of addiction involved in human trafficking, and to cover the pain of what's happening to you, to cover the pain of being raped all the time and being forced to sell yourself to people you've never met, and that whole process of maybe your pimp saying you can't come back until you've made this amount of money, and all of those things, and the abuse, the physical abuse. We had one resident of us who told me that she'd been thrown out of a car so many times, she couldn't remember how many times she'd been thrown out of a car, which is, just gives me chills thinking about this sweet little girl being thrown out of a car so many times she can't remember. So we don't just treat the trauma, we have to treat the addiction, right? And that comes with all of that lifestyle, with the pain, with trauma. So we do a lot of things at Eden House. We have trauma therapy, we have yoga, we have acupuncture that's supposed to help deal with trauma. We have psychiatrists come because medication is a part of a lot of people's journey. We've got occupational therapy, people who come and teach our residents just to work with their hands. And there's something very cathartic about working with your hands in a systematic way. We've also got art therapy. One of the interesting things, and we work with a scientist who does a lot of research on trauma and how it affects the brain. And she can actually show pictures of trauma to children who just weren't picked up, Romanian orphans who weren't held, who weren't picked up, weren't treated the way we would treat a child normally. And she can show parts of the children's brain that have died from the inattention, not beating, not violent abuse, just neglect and the abuse that happens in that type of situation. And the brain is dead in certain parts. So, and what's really fascinating to me about the research is it goes one step further. That type of abuse, trauma, can actually affect the genetic code, parts of the genetic code. And then your genetic code is traumatized and you're passing on genetic code that has been traumatized and changed by trauma. So we're talking about major changes. We're talking about helping people rewire their brain, which of course can be done, right? But you have the addiction to deal with, which is already a big factor in how your brain is affected, and the clinical addiction and coming off of that. And then you also need to deal with the trauma of what's happened. And so you have a lot of things happening at the same time. So there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle, and there are a lot of different services that can help. But at the end of the day, I think the most important part of the Eden community is that we are founded on the idea that love is the strongest force for change. That only until we love and respect every woman who walks in the door and give her the opportunity and the resources for her to heal herself, because nobody else can do it for her. This is part of her journey. We can walk by her side. We can offer support and sisterhood and love and all the services that she might need to recover. But at the end of the day, that's her relationship with herself, relationship with God, that has to really get her there. And so we just hope that we can give people a safe place and the resources they need, that they can start to dream again and really come up with a new plan for their life. And we hope to work with them on that journey.
I love that. Good for you. It's a hard process for sure. We talked briefly about some social media things, but social media really does play a large impact, I feel, in today's society on trafficking, on just self-esteem for girls and boys. Carrie, you were saying for sure in the United States, we deal mostly with girls and women that are trafficked. But there are boys and men that are trafficked too, and stereotypes for them as well. So Sadhvi, in doing the film and just all that you've learned, can you just kind of talk about maybe the role that social media plays, as well as into trafficking in and of itself, as well as maybe the stereotypes that people tend to fit themselves into?
Absolutely. When we made the film back in 2015, 16, and early part of 17, it was a different world. There was still Backpage, and people were able to go online, go through the ads, and look for girls and buy them online and then meet up with them somewhere else. But after the film, then we started to see like, wow, traffickers are using Facebook, Snapchat, and then Instagram to meet girls, boys online, tell them they're a certain age, they start to groom them, become friends with them, and then they start that relationship. And then by this time later on, they're brainwashed, and then they're in their grip. So even from the film's release to now, it's already changed with social media and with all of the apps, TikTok and so forth. It's just getting harder and harder and harder. So I think parents need to be more aware. I feel that they need to know who their kids are talking to, who are they engaged with, even in the gaming world. You know, they're talking to somebody on their headsets, but who are they talking to? Who are you becoming friends with? Because that's where it begins. It's stranger danger online now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great notes.
great notes.
We had a whole series with Junior League talking about different aspects, but so sorry. So we know it's hard when we think about it. It's like it's happening everywhere. How do we know the depth and breadth of this, right? It's very hard. It's a crime that goes underreported, maybe not reported in some countries. How do we collect data on this, and how can we think about other ways to collect data on this to see who's being trafficked, why they're being trafficked, and how many? I mean, I know there's numbers from the UN, right? There's like, I think 40 million is the number that are trafficked worldwide, and that includes child soldiers, child brides, organ trafficking, Sadhvi, like you said, as well as labor and sex trafficking. But how is it? How do we know that scale? And do you think it's more than what we think it is?
I think it's really hard to say. I know, you know, the United States, the State Department, they have the TIPS report, and then they're collecting information from different countries, and each country is always doing their best. But it's really hard to know because most of the victims don't identify as human trafficking or sex trafficking victims. It's hard to track. You don't know what's happening. You don't know where it's happening. So we get emails often for us to participate in different surveys to ask, you know, they're asking like, how many survivors or victims have you encountered and so forth. So I feel that there's different research groups always trying to collect the data, but I feel the numbers are just so hard to pin down because it's such an underworld.
Yeah, agreed. One of the things we brought up was families, right? So Sadhvi, you were saying that sure, in other countries, families will sell their kids for various reasons, most of which is because they're poor, they can't afford to feed them, they want to get food themselves. And it's happening in the United States as well. So how do we stop that happening?
I think I wish I had all the answers because it would be so nice to just stop this thing. I feel like it comes to educating the individual. I mean, the traffickers, the pimps, they're in a different state of mind. They're in it for different reasons. Here in the United States, it's a business, right? They're trying to live off of prostituting men and women, right? And then you can dive deeper, like, well, what areas, where is this happening and why? And so we might have to focus on poverty, like, and really get into that uncomfortable conversation like Carr was mentioning. Also, you know, the city, the state, they have to get more involved. They have to be inspired to start pushing legislation to, you know, with buyers or traffickers, really put like a sentencing on them. Just it happened the other day. This guy, he was in the truck and he ran into a few cars, and what was it? 4 people died.
I think 6 people died and were injured.
And he got like what 110 years for his sentencing. But a trafficker, like for our upcoming film, Surviving Sex Trafficking, he's a music producer. He was trafficking girls in LA, Hollywood, Las Vegas, and his max sentence was 36 months. So it's so unfair. Like, it's like our justice system, in this sense, you don't know what to make of it, because there's just different situations, different sentences, different reasons why it's happening, and there's no solution to bring justice to the victims and the survivors, and getting them the help that they need. So
Yeah. And I'm sure you would probably spend a whole hour talking about ways to better the justice system and laws and all those things. So for those for sure watching, keep track. If you see something in your district that in your state or federal government that is fighting trafficking or laws against trafficking, make sure that the sentences for traffickers are getting longer. The sentences, even buyers should be sentenced, and prostituted girls, boys, women, men, should have leniency. They should have, anyway, I could go on. I don't want to preach here. All right, let's talk a little bit about spotting trafficking. All right, so clearly Sadhvi in your film, some of the images of seeing the girls standing on the street, I feel like that's a clear sign. People maybe that don't necessarily talk about trafficking and would just say, nah, they're prostitutes, right? So we clearly identify them as trafficking victims. We would, because we kind of know behind the scenes and feel like almost everybody's a trafficking victim who's prostituting. But anyway, what are some ways that we can spot trafficking here in the US and maybe potentially if we're traveling abroad? What do you think?
I think we have to observe the demeanor, and we also have to be careful. Are we judging? Are we overreacting? We have to be really, really careful, because sometimes when you report, it could also be a mistake. So it's a really touchy subject, but watching the demeanor, how are their eyes? How are they communicating? Is the person they're with, are they much older and they're younger? And let's say the child, do they appear safe with this adult, or are they kind of looking around and feeling uncomfortable? It's one of those situations, like it's so hard to tell and spot, but regardless, if you feel something, you say something, and someone can always look into it. And like our executive producer, Jeannie Mai, she was at LAX and she noticed something that it just didn't feel right to her. And it was two kids, and I think a man and a woman, and they were going through security, and she felt something was wrong. And so she reported it, and it ended up being a human trafficking situation. So because she's familiar, she felt it in her gut. So then she did something to say something. And if she said something and she wasn't right, it's okay. At least she said something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. All the time to here in the United States, you want to call the National Human Trafficking Hotline number. If you're in a place where you can do that, if it's an emergency, you want to call 911. If you're in the airport, probably go to airport security. National Human Trafficking Hotline number, 888-3737-888, just to plug that for everyone. You should have that in your phone. Kara, what are your thoughts about how to spot human trafficking, especially in New Orleans?
So I think one of the things that's important to remember is that you probably don't want to approach a situation because it could just make it worse for the victim, right? So if you go up and say something that's probably going to be an uncomfortable encounter and maybe dangerous for you or the victim, I think that's probably one of the first things. I think that the police, is a good phone call. The human trafficking hotline is a great phone call. It's a difficult situation because a lot of human trafficking survivors don't, like the director said, they don't self-identify. And so the police might even get there and they'll say, I'm here because I want to be. I mean, people have gotten to Eden House and said, it was all my choice. And then when you actually start to hear the story, oh, your mom died when you were very young, your brother started selling you, you're finally out on your own, which is a great thing, kind of on your own. If your pimp doesn't, at least, your pimp is going to give you some of the money. But if you don't come back having slept with the, making a quota, what happens to you? Oh, I was beaten. Oh, I was thrown out. I had to sleep on the street. Like, is that really choice?
Mm-hmm.
If you have to do it, or you're beaten, or you're sleeping on the street, or you're raped by your pimp, is that a free choice? And it's interesting because a lot of survivors that, kind of we've met that started being trafficking victims as children and kind of age out, it's essentially like they're 18. Now it's their choice. When you actually get the story, there wasn't really any choice involved.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the police get there and they say, oh, this is my boyfriend and this is what I do. So then the police are going to leave, right? Oh, this woman wants to be doing this. And then you get to know, like, oh, she started being raped when she was like 4 to 6. And then, her brother started selling her after her mother died. And then she didn't go to school. She doesn't really have any friends, and she doesn't have any support system. And then when, she wasn't making enough money, or she finally got away, she has nothing else to do. She has no resume. She has no job training. All she knows how to do is survive on the streets. And so it is interesting, like, when we start thinking about who has a choice, who's a survivor, you really have to get through a lot of the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes months to do that. So just the police approach somebody to ask the story, it's really not usually the whole story. And they don't feel like victims sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would agree with you, which is why we train law enforcement. And there are other organizations that train law enforcement to take a victim-centered approach. So, let's make sure that we're calling, call even if you think there's something going on, make the call, go over, ask law enforcement, because it takes a few times of law enforcement coming up and asking for them to maybe say they might need help. So the more times they interact with someone that might be able to help them, the better off, because they might actually be, thinking about leaving. So this film is a great example of how change can happen if we come together, like we all are here, and we want to definitely do things. So what are some things that we can do collectively to stop human trafficking?
So I think that this is a great start. Education is one of the pieces. The mission of Eden House is to eradicate human trafficking, and education is certainly one of the components. I think starting to look beneath the layer. I mean, I remember going to Tulane for law school, and after studying for exams, we would go down and have a nice dinner, at a great restaurant on Bourbon Street. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I worked so hard. I have studied so I can be a lawyer. And these girls are just going to lay on their back for easy money. And that I was totally, some lipstick is cheap. That's easy money. And I think starting to actually look at those beliefs and starting to dig a little bit deeper. It wasn't until I was a diplomat and the human trafficking report was part of my portfolio that I started to really even look at prostitution and human trafficking and start to understand what was going on. I think if you have a snap judgment or a snap cut, stopping and really thinking a little bit deeper about the situation, I think that's a great way to start. I think paying attention to the laws, supporting survivors, supporting organizations who support survivors. I think they're all great things. Eden House, we love volunteers. So if you go to our website, there's a section where you can volunteer and come, clean the garden or drive somebody to a doctor's appointment. We have lots of different options too, if you wanted to do something close to home.
Yeah, those are great options. So it is just about time for Q&A. We have so many other things we could talk about, and we will if there's no questions and answer or questions that we can answer, but I'm sure hopefully there are. So Melissa, are you in charge of questions?
am. Hi to everyone. I am one of the vice chairs for the Abolish Committee for Junior League. And I've been making note of all your questions, and we really do have some great ones. So starting off, kind of going off of the groups, several people were asking about the groups that Eden House partners with to combat human trafficking. One participant asked specifically about Exodus Cry in Missouri. And then another participant asked about any partnering or support with LGBTQ groups or youth that are also victims of human trafficking.
Oh, did it? So I don't know the group in Missouri, but that being said, as the founder of Eden House and president of the board, I don't know like the clinical staff. What happens is if somebody comes to Eden House and they're not safe in the area, or for some reason Eden House is full or not a good fit, we will reach out to other organizations around the country and help people with resources. Even if they're going to stay here and they need resources, we will help support with resources. So just because I don't know that doesn't mean that Eden House hasn't sent somebody there or coordinated with them in the past. The group in Missouri that was asked about, we may have worked with, I think they said Exodus. And so I don't know the answer to that. And then the second question was
about LGBTQ. It seems to be
yes.
popular.
So we have taken, we accept transgender residents, and we have had a transgender resident. Actually, she was in prison in California, but wanted to move closer to her sister, who was in Louisiana. And so we specifically wanted her to come. We don't normally pay for plane tickets for people to come here because we have so many people locally, but we specifically sent her a plane ticket, had her come in. She was actually in California put into a male prison, which I can't believe how hard that must have been to be in a male prison when you identify as female. And so we have had an LGBTQ, a trans resident. And so we have worked with, I know being trans can be, depending on the person, of vulnerability, and there's a lot of injustice around certain issues that people have to deal with. And so I don't know the exact groups we work with in New Orleans, but I can tell you that we take trans residents in our long-term shelter, and we are starting a short-term emergency shelter, which will be for men and women. Over the age of 18, we're not licensed for children, but we're negotiating now for the space. And we're very excited to be starting an emergency shelter, and the first emergency shelter in Southern Louisiana specific to human trafficking survivors.
That's great.
No, it's exciting.
I did post the National Human Trafficking Hotline in the chat, so that way participants would have that direct access on it. We're also going to show those numbers at the end. But there were some questions about how NOPD is involved in human trafficking, and then also the procedures of when you report a incident. Is there a way to follow up on that? And then what kind of questions, like, do you have to give your name? Do you have to give your address and personal information while recording?
Yes, great questions. I can answer about the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Maybe Carrie, you can answer on the New Orleans Police. So for the hotline, if you call, you're welcome to call anonymously. That's fine. It's also okay to be wrong, just like Sadhvi had said before. You know, even if you're unsure of what you're seeing, you should make a call. It's not like calling 911. They're not going to send somebody out if if nothing's happening. They do have contact. The good thing about calling the hotline is they have contact with law enforcement that is specifically trained in taking a victim-centered approach and in human trafficking. And so they have connections all across the country with the right type of police. You know, there's bad people everywhere in every sort of area. So there's, you know, we just want to make sure that the right people are getting out. So we do encourage calling the National Human Trafficking Hotline. You can call anonymously if you'd like. There is, however, no follow-up. So unless, you know, you have specific information that maybe the police need to get in touch with you, and then you ask to be notified, and then everybody says it's okay. But on a general basis, there's no follow-up.
So I think, Susan, it's very similar for NOPD. It's very difficult, I think, to follow up on what's actually happened. We have a good relationship with NOPD and the state police and law enforcement in general. Our first resident in Eden House came from the FBI, and the chief of police and the sheriff and the U.S. attorney for the criminal division for the whole U.S. Department of Justice from DC, Kenneth Poley, came down and spoke at a fundraiser in November. And so we have a great relationship with law enforcement. In general, if you call 911, they will ask you for your name and information. That in general is to call you back if they have a question about what you're reporting. But they will ask for information, and there is very little mechanism for following up on what actually happened, unfortunately.
We also have a question about if there's any laws or legislation that's currently in the works to strengthen penalty against traffickers.
So there is not currently that I know of. So the way the legislative process is, you know, any legislator can bring up new potential legislation in this next legislative session, which will happen in the spring of next year. We are going into a non-fiscal session, so legislators are able to bring up more legislation than during a fiscal session where it's limited. And they can only bring a certain number of bills. As far as I know, there is no legislation to strengthen the laws against human traffickers. The laws are pretty strong right now. I think that there's a lot more that can be done in terms of educating law enforcement, in terms of supporting victims so that they actually can be in a place where they can testify against their traffickers. It's one thing to say, like, let's prosecute the traffickers. Great. There has to be a victim that is in a place, physically one place where they can correspond and work with law enforcement to build the case. And also where they're in an emotional and mental state where they can testify. So at Eden House, we had a resident who testified against her 2 traffickers. And we had to, she lived at Eden House. We had to support her through the entire process. And that included therapy, support with counselors to go to court with her. We got her attorneys and who were supportive and gentle in the process of everything that goes into actually testifying. She was on the stand over 2 days for close to 9 hours with the prosecutors battling her, saying, you're a horrible person, you're a bad mother, you wanted this to happen. And so you have to be strong enough to go through that process. So once she actually testified and they were found guilty, one got 2 life sentences and one got close to a life sentence. And so she did a great job and our justice system worked, right? But I don't know that the need for stronger laws in terms of just the amount of time that they can go to jail. It's that you have to prove the case and we have to get people who are able to walk that walk with victims. And that's not an easy thing to do. They have to be mentally in a pretty strong place to be able to live that.
And to kind of, I guess, back onto that, are there lobbyists for sex trafficking at the state level?
I don't know of any lobbyists for fighting human trafficking. I do know that there are a lot of legislatures and people who are interested in the fight against human trafficking. Our governor and first lady have taken this on as a huge issue. They have brought a lot of attention to this issue. Neil Abramson and I have worked on legislation to really strengthen the laws to protect children and victims, and we're moving forward on that front, which is wonderful. It is interesting, some legislation that came up last legislative session that is likely to come up again this legislative session, which is legislation to completely legalize prostitution. And it, from the standpoint of Eden House, completely legalizing prostitution in a lot of countries where that's happened tends to increase the amount of human trafficking rather than decrease the amount of human trafficking. It also tends to raise demand, because if it's legal, then you're going to demand the service, and you actually don't know who is providing the service. You don't know if that person's a child. You don't know if that person has been raped since they were young, and they've had no opportunity for any education. This is really the only choice. Or if it's somebody who, is putting themselves through college. You really don't know kind of as you're consuming. So that's an interesting piece of legislation that may or may not, but I'm guessing will probably be raised again this next legislative session.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Legalizing prostitution does not make it safer. It increases demand, just like you said. So for everyone listening here, do not be caught up in anyone who's going to tell you that legalizing prostitution is the way to stop it, to eradicate it, to whatever. It does not. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox there.
And we're having several questions about the new film that's coming out in the spring. If you could give us just a little bit more information about how we can watch it when it does come out.
Yes, so the film is Surviving Sex Trafficking. That's the name of the film. And it will come out in March 28th?
24th.
24th. And we'll have the big premiere. It's going to be in select theaters. Hopefully New Orleans will be one of the locations. And we'll be in theaters for either 1 day or 2 days. We haven't decided yet, but it will be released on that date. And then after that, it's going to go out to kind of like Amazon Prime, iTunes, YouTube, where it can be watched online and it can be streamed there. A few people were asking on the chat, what is the film about? And we just wanted to touch on that briefly. It's kind of like a follow-up to Stopping Traffic, where we realized after we came out with Stopping Traffic that people wanted to know more about the survivors, more about the victims and their story. Kind of like Carla, they would ask, what happened to her after she escaped? What's her story after, the fact? And so what we wanted to focus on with this new film is the stories of survivors and sharing what they've gone through and what they have to deal post trafficking, because oftentimes we think that, rescuing it's everything, but the real journey of healing begins once you rescue them. And that journey of healing can take a lifetime. And for people to realize and understand that survivors need so much help, just as Kara has explained, and with the amazing work that she's doing and providing those resources and services for them, it takes an army to help them. And that's exactly what we want to show through this film, is show the journey of survivors and the much needed help that that they need, and hopefully inspire people to do more for them.
And how have you grown as activists during the making of these films, and kind of like what's the biggest lesson you've learned?
Ooh, great question. It comes back down to, everybody has pain. And through pain, we can actually relate to survivors and victims of human trafficking. Sometimes people think like, oh, I can't relate to other people, but you can actually relate to pain from your own experience, and just for them, take it to another level. So the biggest lesson is really, when you care, you will do something about it. So how do we inspire people to really care about human trafficking, to care about the survivors, and how to really help them? I just saw the question pop up, like, how do we really help connect with them, be their friends? Depending on their situation, maybe you'll meet a survivor leader and see how you can volunteer to support her or him in their journey to train others and to promote their nonprofit work and training that they're trying to do. So there's ways when you network, you attend events, you can meet survivors and ask them, like, how can I help you? How can I serve you? We're here for you. And being with them, listening to them, and it will take that experience much, much higher. Juby's joining us.
Love it.
Yeah, it's I feel like when we read articles or we watch videos, even online, there's still that disconnect. So one thing we learned through the process is when you connect with them directly, it just takes the experience much deeper, and that's the way you can help even more.
If I can add to that, one thing that we experienced through making the film is the fact that not only did we want to make films, we wanted to take a step further. And through the film, we started our new nonprofit called Stopping Traffic. And we decided that we wanted to provide more resources and support for victims and survivors. So our organization, Stopping Traffic, now provides scholarships for survivors of trafficking. This way they can get through school, through university, or whatever type of education they're seeking. We also help them with workshops, healing workshops. So for example, if Kara wanted us to come and visit Eden House, we can come and do workshops for the girls, the ladies. Or they can come to our center to take or attend the workshops like PTSD healing. We also provide financial resources for shelters. So this way they can get a little bit more support. So sometimes we're able to send some funding, for example, to Eden House as well. We try to through the film's profits as well. So it's all channeled back to the cause, all goes back to the survivors and the shelters that need help. And yeah, so these are some of the things we're doing also as part of our growth, as advocates and activists against human trafficking.
I love that. I love that. Of course, volunteering is a great way to get involved. So those of you in New Orleans, of course, Eden House is a great place. There's also other places also getting involved with homeless, right? So we know that the homeless population is a big target for traffickers. So
Covenant House,
I'll give you
youth.
I'll give you food if you give me sex, those things like that. Mm-hmm.
Covenant House of New Orleans is homeless youth, and they have a lot of vulnerable kids who some of them end up as being trafficked. So that's another great place.
Yeah, and if anybody's here not from New Orleans or Louisiana, I would say just do a Google search of your area as anti-trafficking organizations, and I'm sure something will pop up. And every organization needs time and resources to work, to operate.
And another frequent question that we're getting is to kind of just go on how we can help as well with education, is to again, donate to Eden House, donate to Covenant House. We do want to go ahead and thank our speakers and attendees for joining us, as well as our Abolish committee, who's been working behind the scenes to make tonight possible. Going on that question with education, we are going to be hosting a panel discussion on January 25th at 6 p.m. And this is going to be held in conjunction with Human Trafficking Awareness Month, which is the month of January. We're hosting the Junior League of New Orleans is hosting the virtual event Survivor Stories. This is an online event that will feature stories of human trafficking victims and will be moderated by Jennifer Ray, the coordinator for the Greater New Orleans Human Trafficking Task Force. To continue learning about the realities of trafficking, the resources that are available to victims, and the ways community can support anti-trafficking efforts. We do ask that you share this with your friends and colleagues. These events are free and open to the public. Also in January, we will be partnering with Eden House and Covenant House on a donation drive to help support victims with the items needed. Please look for the link to donate items via Amazon at jlno.org. And if you click on the heading in jlno.org/abolish, there's also more education information and the direct links to the Amazon wish lists. And it is right there on the screen. Also, we have our links with Eden House, Loyola's Modern Slavery Research, and our other partners. And thank you all so much again for joining us for tonight's discussion.
Thank you, guys. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. We appreciate you being here. Thank you, Sadhvi and Kara. It was just wonderful to have this panel with you.
Thank you, you too.
Bye, y'all. Good night. Merry Christmas.
Good night. Merry Christmas.
Stay
Good night. Take care.
Bye-bye.